put in. I learned I should just press here, like this, and then you just put this small laptop. Yeah, I know it.
morning. Good morning. I suggest we start. Colleagues, let's start as I indicated. My name is Malikutu Bubabe. I'm currently acting as Executive Director in the Department of Leadership and Transformation. I want to take this opportunity to welcome you to this important seminar entitled Fostering Greater Social Cohesion, Nation Building, and a Shared National Identity. I really would like to welcome you to this, particularly your decision to come and be with us for the next 3 hours or so, despite your busy schedule. We'll hope we'll learn together. You'll take some things out of this particular seminar, particularly because it talks to what we do as human beings, Batho. As you are aware, the seminar is held in line with the UNISA 150 annual theme, Reclaiming Africa's Intellectual Futures. For your information, colleagues, the Department of Leadership and Transformation do organize seminar, and this one is part and parcel of a program to commemorate Human Rights Month, as well as to take stock of the role UNISA play in the past 150 years of its existence. We should, I guess, also be speculating on the role that we want UNISA to play in the next 150 years. I'm going to be facilitating this session in the absence of our colleague, Professor Grace Kunong, who unfortunately is not well, who was supposed to facilitate this session. And as a result, I'll be doing a lot of things, but it might not be necessary to go there. As I indicated, we should speculate on how we would want UNISA to do in terms of promoting, protecting the human right over the next 150 years. For this month, our focus as a department is on the notion of human rights, and that's the reason why we'll be having a discussion around that with our colleague. Some of the issues to be discussed in this month and in this seminar include the following, among others: 150 years of history of UNISA and the notion of human rights. I want to urge colleagues to look at the article that was published yesterday relating to this particular topic. And in this regard, I want to thank my colleague, Ms. Karen Riedel-Hazing, who pinned that particular article. Please read that particular article. No, sorry, this article was published a while ago, and I think it was pinned by our colleagues, Ms. Gugu Masingi. The second issue that we want to talk about is human rights and responsibility, and I guess this is what we'll be discussing today. The Constitution from a Bill of Rights perspective, the role of UNISA as the largest ODEL institution expanding access to the poor and the working class, the legal and regulatory framework, are this appropriate? And this is the article that I'm talking about, the article that was published late yesterday, and I'll urge colleagues to look at it. This were deliberately chosen topic for the department to focus on, and thankfully, Ms. Matsie Moki, who is a senior lecturer in constitutional law and human rights, agreed with us from the College of Law, agreed with us to come in and share her views relating to some of the topics that I have been discussing. Then there will be a respondent by our colleague, Me Ndate Consul Kliane, who is a Director of Systems and Policy in the Department of Leadership. Colleagues, as I've already indicated, the purpose of the seminar, as it has been said, is to actually interrogate the actual legal and regulatory framework and pose a question as to the appropriateness of this framework to protect and to promote human rights. It will also present the consequence of violating human rights from a workplace and an individual perspective. That's what the article pinned by my colleague Karen Riedel-Hazing is all about. And then finally, we will interrogate what it will take to build a human rights culture within our own country and within UNISA in particular. What then does that mean? It means we'll have to engage each other, because human rights can only be practiced within the context of humanity. In my language, it's called Botho. And then you move from being Motho into Botho, into living like a human being, say to, Wapila say to, which is a totally different thing. And it's all about engaging all those things. I really want to urge us to really look at this continuum of Motho, Botho, and then say to, which is much more around living the values of being a human being. And I guess part of what we are going to hear today is really around that particular aspect. I don't want to go on and talk about what in the article by our colleague Karen talks about in terms of what we need to do in order to create that culture of human rights within the institution. Colleagues, you are aware of the fact that there is contestation relating to the whole notion of human rights. I don't want to go in there, and I hope my colleague, our colleague Mematsie will be talking about, but there are contestation around it. There are the view that human right is basically a liberal tradition. It has been constructed from that and does not take into account the African perspective. Two, the whole notion of human right versus collective or a community, particularly in view of the African context. How do you manage the contradiction between the notion of individual human rights and community or group rights? And that, I think, is the challenge that we need to look at. If we are at UNISA, which rights will have to supersede the other? Is it my individual right or the UNISA right, which are there in terms of what we offer, in terms of our mission, vision, as well as our social mandate? Colleagues, I'm looking forward to an engaging discussion around this. And without any waste of time, let me then, in terms of the program, welcome you all again into this seminar. Specifically, I want to welcome Professor Nkosi, the acting executive dean of the college, my college, by the way, the College of Human Sciences. Welcome, Prof. Nkosi. We really appreciate your presence and all of you coming into this particular space. Let me not go on and on and on, but let me then call upon Matsie Moki to come and talk to us about what she has prepared for us. Who is Matsie? She told me she's a senior lecturer in the College of Law, Department of Public, Constitutional and International Law at UNISA. Her area of research is international and regional human rights protection with specific interest in gender and the law, diversity, reproductive and sexual health rights, transformation and local government. So we are not lost. We have the right person to talk to us. Besides academia, she has also worked with various civic society organizations on women and health issues in South Africa, Botswana, and Uganda. She has also served in several boards, including the Municipality Demarcation Board and the Commission for Gender Equality as Section 6 gender specialist. We are indeed honored, Moki, to have you with us. Please share with us what you've prepared for us. Thank you very much. Colleagues, can we welcome her to the stage?
Good morning. Program Director, feel free to alert me when I'm getting to 30 minutes. I don't want to go for a long time. I have a whole lot of things that I wanted to say, but having read the article that was pinned yesterday, having listened to you this morning, I think each one of you have taken what I need to say. Thank you, Feda, for the warm welcome, the warm introduction. I am happy and humbled to be here. It really feels good. All protocol observed, I could only hear Professor Nkosi. So I also need to acknowledge Professor Nkosi and to acknowledge colleagues who invited me. When the organizers of this event asked me whether I will be able to join the celebration today, we know this month we've had events, seminars, conferences, because it's a National Women's Month. I was delighted. There was no way I could say no. And it's very simple, because I looked first at the theme, fostering social cohesion, nation building, and a shared national identity, as well as the subtopics as mentioned by Dr. Bopape, the issue of notion of human rights, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, access to education, our responsibility as UNICEN, and enforcement mechanism and regulatory framework. And then I thought, this is a call to introspect, to self-evaluate, to self-diagnose, and to self-reflect, as UNISA is playing a big role in saving humanity in Africa and outside Africa. More so because it is celebrating 150 years. On the 8th of May, 2023, we will be celebrating 27th anniversary of the adoption of the final constitution in South Africa. And this year, it is the 29 years of a democratic South Africa. And furthermore, this year, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is a founding document, it's celebrating its 75th year. And when you read this document that was adopted in 1948, and you read the provisions of the Bill of Rights of 1996, you'll see there is a copy and pasting of these rights, whether they're civil and political rights or they're social, economic, and cultural rights. All the rights that are in our Constitution, you'll find them in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And I want us to pause a bit. I've just said it's almost 30 years since the advent of democracy, where we have rights entrenched in the Constitution. But we still get headlines such as the first Black to achieve this, the first Black woman to be appointed this, the first. While we celebrate and do was and get goosebumps because we are happy we are seeing progress, 30 years we can say that somehow the country might be transforming at a pace that we never anticipated when we sang freedom songs, and I'm not sure what needs to be done. We still experience inequalities, and there still exist inequalities relating to race, class, gender, let alone inequalities when it comes to people living with disabilities. So are these rights saving us? I would want to tell you a short, it's not a story, it's actually a question that was posed last year, 2022, on the 9th of August. I heard it from a close friend of mine, Lebo Pule. But actually, she referred me to the person who asked that question. And that person is Reverend Masofia Some of you might know she's very influential on the social media platform. The message or the question that I heard last year has since stayed with me. It is in my heart, it is in my head. Every day I reflect on it. And the question she asked was, in 2022, in celebration of National Women's Day, what is the song of the current women? She said that because she reflected that in 1956, women of color, of different races, of different class, social background, had one song, and the song was Watinti Bafazi, Watinti Imbokoto, literally meaning you strike a woman, you strike a rock. And then when I go further, I also realized that the month that we are celebrating right now, the Human Rights Month, on the 21st of March, 1960, the heroes and the heroines in Sharpeville also had a song. They picked a struggle, and the struggle was struggle against the carrying of past law. You move a little bit lower, you go to 1976. The students of 1976 picked a struggle as well, and the struggle was abolition of Africans. And then you go further, as we're going through the democratization process, the struggle that people of that time focused on was the unbanning of political parties and the release of political prisoners. Just in 2015 and 2016, the students in most universities also picked a struggle, and the struggle was, we want free and decolonized higher education under the hashtag of fees must fall. And I wondered, currently we live in a country which has severe gender-based violence and femicide. Every day we are talking about the number of women that are killed, that are raped. We are not talking about the number of men that are raping, so we are not changing the narrative. We wake up to stories of trafficking of women and of children, excessive drug use among our youth, harsh socioeconomic conditions, racism is still here, inequalities in different forms, we still see them. And the question that I asked myself when I heard the question in 2022 was, what is our song as the current generation? What is the struggle that we are picking? Because sometimes I see us hashtagging end violence in Russia, end violence in America, Black Lives Matters, and somehow I'm not sure whether it's possible to get to the end goal if we can't come together and pick a struggle or an issue that we want to focus on, eating this pie bit by bit, day by day. So now, we're talking about fostering greater social cohesion, nation building, and a shared national identity. If you look at the annual national calendar in South Africa, you'll see that the theme for the Human Rights Month is consolidating and sustaining human rights culture into the future, which is exactly what we are doing today, looking into rights, looking into the notion of human rights. What does the Constitution say? Can we have rights without responsibilities? Whose rights are better, whose rights are not better, and so forth and so on. I would like to take a journey back with you and invite you to look into the preamble of the 1996 Constitution, loaded with a number of words. It says, and I'm not going to read it verbatim, it says, we, the people of South Africa, recognize the injustice of our past, and we all know what those injustices are. Unequal pay for work of equal value, unequal societies, non-voting rights, racism, and so forth. And then it says, we honor those who suffered for justice and freedom in our land, and we adopt this constitution so that, among others, we heal the division of the past. And I'm pausing there and I'm asking, are the divisions of the past healed? When you look around us in areas of senior management, in areas of strategic positions, especially the JSE, when you look almost everywhere, it's kind of like the injustice of the past are still apparent. So I'm not sure how far we are. I'm not saying we're doing bad, but I said it's time to self-reflect, to think deeper, so that at the end we can be able to pick a song for us and a struggle for us. And then it says, we want to establish a society based on democratic values, social justice, and fundamental human rights, which is why we are here today. But more than any other thing, to build a united and democratic South Africa. Remember, we spoke about nation building, shared identity, and social cohesion. What is social cohesion and what is national building? These two concepts are related, are intertwined, and once both are achieved, it becomes easier now to share a common national identity. Social cohesion is the degree to which members of society unite because of common values, beliefs, and goals. We can only be cohesive if we eliminate, and I believe in the elimination, or we reduce inequalities. That can either be based on race, sex, gender, ethnicity, religion, disability, age, nationality, you name them. Section 9, subsection 3 of the Constitution articulate that list properly, and it even tells you that the list is not exhaustive. We can always add, as long as we feel that I didn't get that job because of A, B, and C. I didn't get to be picked because of A, B, and C. So we can only achieve a just society if we work on those things. While on the other hand, nation building refers to the process of creating a unified nation out of a diverse population. South Africa and UNISA, South Africa in general, UNISA in particular, has a diverse population. Whether people are black, whether they are red, white, or yellow, whether people are Xhosa, Ghanaian, whether people are living with certain or particular types of disability, whether people are rich or poor, we're very diverse. And for us to achieve social cohesion and a common national identity, we need to recognize and respect and accommodate our differences. Social cohesion is necessary for nation building because it creates a sense of unity among people. When people have common values, common beliefs, and goals, they are more likely to work together for a common purpose, right? And that's how you get to a national identity. So all three concepts, social cohesion, nation building, shared national identity, refer to a sense of belonging where you know that I belong there. You wake up and you come to work, you wake up and you fight for your country knowing that I'm not there by mistake. I belong there because we have defined our common values. Now, the main question, which I think from today on going forward, as we are planning for the next 150 years, is to internalize this and to ask ourselves the extent to which we play a role in ensuring that we contribute towards a socially cohesive society with shared identity where none of us as Unisans, staff, students, stakeholders, and the communities we live in, we do not feel left out, and we experience a sense of belonging with pride, irrespective of our color, race. I've mentioned them. And right now, I want you to pause and think of the following two descriptors that I'm going to give. The first one says, a 50-year-old black lesbian woman from the rural area. 58-year-old lesbian black woman from the rural area. And the second one just says, a 38-year man from Kempton Park. That's how, when we talk, we describe people. And the reason I'm giving these examples is for us to understand what is in the heart of intersectionality when we talk about rights, that we don't experience differentiation, discrimination, and exclusion the same way. You will see that that woman has so many things that defines her, and that's how people will view her, or that's how people will exclude her. Age, race, sexuality, class. Whereas a 50-year-old man from Kempton Park can be just any white man or any black man of any age, but already we want to see, is this the woman? So I want us, when you talk about intersectionality, when you talk about human rights, when you talk about exclusion, when you talk about Section 9, subsection 3 of the Constitution, we see how these things work. Women can narrate stories for days of how they were discriminated simply because of their ability to birth kids. That if you are applying for a job and you look pregnant, we sometimes, when you leave there, you're like, hey, man, this one, you know? When we see a person who's not as able as us come for an interview, the first question we start, would he be able to cope? What if there's load shedding and he can't use the, all those things. So I want us to look at that. But I also want us to come home and look at UNISA's vision and ask ourselves, to what extent does it contribute to issues of human rights, social cohesion? Our vision is very simple. It says, towards the African University, shaping futures in the service of humanity. Dr. Bopape spoke about humanity in the sense of Poto. If we go back to the interim constitution, if time allows, I'll go back there. The crafters of UNISA's vision perfectly understood the concept of social cohesion and shared identity to the context that they even go beyond national borders. If you read the 2021 annual report of UNISA, it says that our vision defines everything we do. It describes our wish to serve every country on the African continent while transcending language and cultural barriers. That language and cultural barriers are never an issue. Even during apartheid, we'd see white men getting married to black women. We see Ghanaians getting married to South Africans. So all these things are doable. So in saving the African University, we are not constrained by the country, the culture, and the language, meaning that as UNISA, I would like to believe we're 100% committed, because you find UNISA in more than 130 countries when you look at the student profile. Humanity, on the other hand, is a concept that is known in every culture. When you go to every country in Africa, they'll give you their version of what Poto is, of what Ubuntu is. But with scholars who are rooted in a Eurocentric education, legal and non-legal, there was a time, we know that Poto or Ubuntu was also a constitutional value in the interim constitution. But scholars have actually debated on whether Ubuntu can be a philosophical theory, whether we can incorporate it, simply because most of the time we want to rely on theories that are easy to us, that have been rehearsed a number of times. But Botu, in my language, which is Setswana, re motho ke motho ka batho. I am because we are. And it is a value that ha re le ko gae, when we are home, we live with it. We know, I normally get surprised because the first thing that you do when you pass somebody is like, hello, how are you? And then the how are you, lekai, in my language, has far more than just you being there. We want you to tell us about your health, where you are in your like we want to know everything, how the kids are growing. So that is our motto. But somehow, as scholars, as academics, as theorists as well, we haven't run with this concept. I think we've been beaten. And I agree that Botu is not that important. Hence, even in the 1996 Constitution, it is not there. There have been a number of times where I bashed the South African Constitution. People would say, but we have such a wonderful Constitution. And my argument has always been, hey, that was, to me, just a time-being Constitution, right? For us to vote, to come together. But I think we still need a constitution where we'll play a greater role, which will incorporate African principles, African values, which, you know, not a copy and paste of, I don't know whether I would get there, but I think it's, I used to say way back that it's a mixed masala. Sometimes you want me to vote when I don't have access to food, access to better health care, and you expect me to wake up and go eat. What is the hierarchy of rights? And we all know in Europe and other Western countries, when after passing of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, which has these rights together, then there was a time that, no, but the Universal Declaration is not binding. Can we have proper conventions which will hold states liable? But the West couldn't agree to have socio-economic rights as a binding document. So we had two now conventions in 1966. The International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which is what the West sees as rights, voting and all those political rights. Whereas social and economic rights, we know they call themselves first world countries or whatever, that they don't struggle with health, they don't struggle with education, they don't struggle. So they refuse to have all these rights together. So even when we were adopting the final constitution, you would know that there was this debate, do we have to add socioeconomic rights in the constitution? Can we afford them? And based on the case that went to the Constitutional Court before the final certification of the final constitution, the judges of the then Constitutional Court agreed that we need socioeconomic rights as basic rights. But when you look at the history of the performance of socioeconomic rights, and I still remember one of the first cases on socioeconomic rights, which was access to housing, Grootboom won the case, that yes, the state or the government should give you housing. But many years later, she died without getting the house. So she won the battle at the court, but implementation was not there. So because, you know, socioeconomic rights are expensive. When you say free education, where are we going to get the money? When we say free private health care or public health care of equal value as private health care, we don't have money. We've seen what is happening in our hospitals and so forth and so on. From moving from the UNISA vision, I just want to touch on two UNISA values, which shows where UNISA is in terms of thinking, in terms of incorporating human rights. Whether we live it or not, it's a different story. One of our core values is integrity, which refers to conduct guided by honesty, equity, respect, transparency, responsibility and accountability. And when you see from the themes, we are asking, can we only have rights or do we have rights or responsibility? But when you look at what integrity in our value means, you'd see that we need to be accountable, we need to respect one another, we need to be responsible, we need to be guided by honesty. Then there's another value that is equally important, which also marries what is in the Constitution, which is dignity in diversity. And UNISA says that this is where we commit to the promotion of humanness. Botho again comes anti-racism and self-worth in the context of cultural and intellectual differences for the attainment of equality and non-discrimination. So the question is, can we tolerate one another? Are we able to be in a safe space, talk and debate without feeling like we are being attacked or we need to defend ourselves? Are other people using their positions to silence us? Because Dignity in Diversity says, you need to know how I feel. And I remember some few years ago, I had a question. I teach international human rights. So I had a question in the assignment, and one student called me and said, hey, ma'am, are you from South Africa? And proudly I said, yes, I am. And he says, I don't think now you understand that you don't refer to people as he or she, because some of us do not fit that description. Because, we'll always say he, she will come and say, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. And then he says sexual orientation or sexuality, which is one of the grounds of exclusion, needs you to look around and start saying, this is a toilet for men, this is a toilet for women, but people are not just classified as men and women, there are other classes as well. Are we able to get there? Can we get there? Or now, as my grandmother would say, in our times, we never had such issues. So it's either you're a man or you are a woman. So human rights teaches us to reflect on those things. So let's briefly talk about the history of UNISA and the notion of human rights. I've been here, I think, for a decade. It's been a long time, slightly over a decade, 11 years. I'm not sure about the history of UNISA, but I've heard about UNISA ever since I was young. My mother was studying at UNISA. So in celebrating 150 years, this is what I can tell you. UNISA has existed in different centuries. 19th century, UNISA was there, that's when it was created. 20th century, UNISA was there, that's when we attained democracy. 21st century, which is the era now of the revolutions, the era of social media, the era of fourth industrial, what, UNISA is still there. UNISA existed during colonialism, during apartheid, during the democratization process, and in post-constitutional South Africa. So therefore, we need to be at the forefront because we've been accepting students of any background from way back. When you look at the alumni from UNISA, you will see that somehow there's something that they got right. I'm not sure whether when you are inside you get to appreciate it. I think I've got more complaints than appreciation because I see things that are not being done well, but when you go back and reflect, you will see that if you have a qualification from UNISA, you are proved to be anything you can be. Whether you want to be the president of the country, you will see that President Ramaphosa was a student here, President Nelson Mandela, President Mugabe. Whether you want to be the Chief Justice of the Constitutional Court, Chief Justice Pius Langa was here, Chief Khwem was here, Chief Justice, the current Chief Justice, Raymond Zondo was here. If you want to be a prominent politician, Dr. Rampene Mampele, Oliver Tambo, they are all alumni of UNISA, which shows that UNISA has been able to, when you read stories of other institutions of higher learning, you'll hear people say, no, we couldn't get access, and so forth. So from our alumni list, it shows that that's what some of the things that we manage to get right, and more than any other thing, we're able to provide access to education irrespective of race or creed. So we have been able to embody those human. So simply put, I think we all know what are human rights. My nieces and nephews always threaten me, no, I've got the right to eat sugar. I've got this right, I've got this right. Simply put, human rights are rights we have simply because we are human, simply because we exist. They're inherent to us, irrespective of how we look, our color, our class, our gender, and so forth. They are universal. And I thought sometimes we'll enter into the debate of whether human rights are Africa or not. There was a time that I was a proponent of the idea of human rights from an African perspective until I had to deal with a case. If you see, one of my areas is sexual and reproductive health, until I had to deal with cases of forced sterilization. I'm a pro-abortionist, and I've seen horrible stories where people, because of restrictive abortion law, are forced to carry pregnancy to term and so forth and so on. So I'm still sitting on the first day. Sometimes it's an umbrella. When it rains, you take it. When it doesn't rain, you put it down, right? And when you look at human rights as well from a UNISA perspective, you will understand the meaning of UNGC principles, which UNISA has adopted. In fact, UNISA requires each and every academic to incorporate UNGC principles into the module of teaching. And I remember when we were revising the study guide, we're like, hey, UNISA, how do we put this thing? We don't want, But when you look at the UNGC principle, it talks about human rights, it talks about principles of labor, so that our students are always equipped with the knowledge at that level. We've spoken about the history of the Constitution, the rights that are there. I've spoken about social and political rights. Let me just emphasize that when it comes to the issue of UNISA expanding access to the poor and the working class, I've given you an example of alumni, but let's start here. We have the right to basic education, which is a must when you read the Constitution. But when it comes to higher and further education, the Constitution doesn't say everyone has. It says look into different things, look into policy, look into whether we can afford it, and then that's how we provide it. But alongside other rights, the Constitution gives us the right to equality, that yes, we really need a VC who's a woman. In 148 years, it has always been men. So can we respect equality? The right to dignity. All of us are born with dignity, irrespective of how ugly we look, how horrible or terrible we are, how not smart we are. It is not a basis to treat people somehow. Dignity is inherent in all of us. We've got the right to information. I have the right to knock on offices to ask for information and to be granted information. Freedom of expression, including academic freedom. I was just talking to Mr. Bopape that sometimes there are death rights, but we are silenced by intimidation. Sometimes you see when you want to speak, somebody's looking at you like this to say, dare you say that, I'm going to deal with you when we get to the office, and so forth and so on. But we have freedom of expression. We have the right to assembly, to demonstrate, and to picket. Freedom of association, language and culture, the right of cultural, religious, and linguistic communities. They are all essential. And I remember, I always use myself as an example. It has always been difficult for me to give or to agree to supervise a test on a Saturday, simply because I understand the plight of the Seventh Adventist student who have the right to practice their religion when it comes to observing their religion, and them saying, Joe, I don't want to fail that module. I try to engage. Sometimes it's not as simple as you want it, but I always ask myself, why can't we wake up on a Sunday and we're told it's an exam day? Why does it seem as if Saturday is an easy day to violate, because the majority of us are Christians? So those are some of the things we need to reflect on going forward. This right ensure that the institution can promote equity and treat all human beings equally. We always go back to those distinctions that are on section 9.3. Here's the biggest question. Do rights have responsibilities, or can rights be limited? Or when I say I have this right, is the right absolute? No one can do anything. Rights go with responsibilities, and we know that responsibilities are individual duties or things that individuals should do, such as following the law or following a rule at work, university, or in the country. You have rights, but you also have duties. In the beginning, Dr. Bopape spoke about Africans. When you look at the regional human rights conventions, we have the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, which is the charter that was promulgated by the former Organization of African Unity, now the AU. It is the only charter among all regional charters that ties down and notes and highlight the duties of communities. So rights goes with duties and responsibilities. For instance, much as well as I have the right to dignity, I also have the responsibility to treat others with respect and dignity. The rights in the Bill of Rights are not absolute. They can be limited in various ways. There's what we call Section 36, the limitation clause, when we want to see to what extent have you stretched your right. So we do a balancing process by using Section 36. But some rights in the Bill of Rights can have what you call internal modifiers, limitations within themselves. For instance, we spoke about the right to demonstrate. When you read Section 17 of the Constitution, it says, everyone has the right to peacefully and unarmed to assemble, demonstrate, and to picket. The minute you are not picketing peacefully, the minute you are armed, you have lost the right because there's a limitation with it. Sometimes rights can be limited by other rights. For instance, you've got the right to freedom of expression. Karen has the right to privacy. So my freedom of expression doesn't allow me to invade her privacy, and when you ask me, I say, no, freedom of expression is there in the Constitution, so we need to be mindful of what we say. We need to be mindful to exercise our rights within limits. Access to the poor and the working class student. I talked about the right to higher education, which says that everyone has the right to further education, which the state, through reasonable measures, must make progressively available and accessible. And that's one of the biggest questions as UNISA. Are we making education accessible? Despite key milestone that has been made, higher education still remains a privilege for most poor people, for people from poor backgrounds. Hence, now there have been debates of, despite the fact that we are saying there's expansion in the coffers of NSFAS, there are still those that we call the missing middle, even when it comes to access to housing. They are not as poor as to benefit from government subsidy, but they are also not as rich as to be able to get out of their pocket. So access to further education is still very limited. But also, when you look at our foundational education in primary school, in high school, public education, we have to agree that there is a dire need to focus and to invest there. Because sometimes somebody can qualify for funding, but when they have to come to the university because of the poor infrastructure from their school, poor education system, they struggle. UNISA has been able to close the gap in terms of the ODL model. Like we said, it has the capacity to reach more than 130 countries. We know that it has regional centers and so forth. It's able to reach people irrespective of whether they're in urban or rural areas, people who are working full-time and so forth. And I've seen recently there's been special programs that makes UNISA stand aside. And I'm going to even register my personal opinion to them. We have a project in Ethiopia, we have a project in Eritrea. This program that are designed for these countries, they show UNICEF's commitment to ensuring access, especially in countries that do not have a good record of human rights. If you know about Eritrea, you know that Eritreans, once you leave Eritrea, you cannot go back. You are not even allowed to leave Eritrea. We know how it is there, and when you look at the profile of the students from there, you'll find that they are prominent government officials. You'll find that they are judges, and therefore they're trying to increase the notion of human rights. But the extent to which we ban when we go outside, it's not the same as how we ban when we talk about students who are living in high rural areas. Somehow COVID just make it normal for somebody who has never used a computer in their life to, to say that, hey, now we are online. In fact, that's what I prefer, but I still get challenges here, and then I'm asking, can't we even have exceptions and treat each case the way the Constitution say? Reasonable accommodation of everyone. We talk about reasonable accommodation. So some of the factors that inhibit access to higher education will be the digital divide due to socioeconomic conditions, the energy crisis, constant load shedding, and the fact that the model that we implement, much as you say in human rights, might not be African, the Odell model that we implement is actually based on other parts of the country without actually bringing a closer look to what UNICEF is. How are UNICEF playing a role in the promotion of the culture of human rights? We do. We have various programs. We have various departments. We have curriculum that ensures that there's continuous sustenance of the culture of human rights. I myself teach human rights. We have students in correctional facilities, and we always make means to reach them. We have students living with disability, and then we have the Advocacy and Resource Center that ensures that students living with disabilities are being assisted. We have Memorandum of Understanding with South African Human Rights, which is a Chapter 9 institution responsible for the promotion and protection of human rights. We always have courses, we have seminars, we have this gathering where we reflect and talk about human rights. We have the Curriculum Transformation Unit that forces us to look into our curriculum as academics as well as the courses for students. We have the Wellness Center. When we talk about rights, we normally suffer in silence. People have issues of physical and mental health. We have wellness, but I don't know whether we have done a diagnostic review to check how mentally well we are, whether emotions are okay or not. I will not talk about the legal and regulatory framework, and I'll refer you to the article that was highlighted before. And when it comes to compliance, the article also touched on issues of compliance, but we know what is the issue. Access to justice is never cheap. You will fight courts until you go gray, and then until like, oh, good, I don't have money. From the Constitution to labor relations, if you have money and you lose from the Constitutional Court, there are other avenues. You can approach the African Court on Human and People's Rights. A few years ago, we represented Prince, the marijuana guy, at the African Commission, but he lost the case. And then we're trying to take the case to the Human Rights Committee of the ICCPR, and then marijuana was legalized. So now, in conclusion, my conclusion is a little bit long, and I would like to zoom into it. I think I have a minute left, so you borrow me 2 minutes, and then we cut on the questions. Fair? Fair. UNISA is doing more to foster social cohesion. But one of the central questions, I love questions because I want to leave you with questions. I don't have answers, right? One of the central questions we need to ask ourselves is whether every one of us, first of all, is aware of these various conventions and instruments on human rights, either in the country or in the university. Whether we are aware of support mechanisms and policies that we have, but in being aware, what are the challenges that we are experiencing? We can't just be ticking boxes. Sometimes there are challenges. So this conversation is important, but it's also important to have conversations on issues that institutions of higher learning actually always run away from. Workloads. You have this unit with this important work, but the structure is the small. I'm teaching 3 or 4 modules. I'm supervising more than 10 students. I barely sleep, right? Low research output, resignations. We spoke about them off the record. There's been high resignations in UNISA. What are the underlying reasons? Issues of intimidation, issues of sexual harassment, issues of intimidation. We know a few years ago at the Union building, we've been in the news, the sexual harassment cases. Sometimes I'm not saying they are there, but can we have conversation? Do they know how we work? Whoever is responsible somewhere, somehow, can you hear us and talk to us and ask us how are we feeling? Working post-COVID, where we don't sleep, you receive emails at 10:15, you wake up on Saturday, you have to respond. Do we really have time for our families? Can we talk about that? Can we have a conversation? Because I said, yes, we have rights, but sometimes we are silenced strategically and in a very smart way. So if we can have those conversations and we become honest about our frustration, we love putting things under the carpet. If you ask me, how are you? I'm quickly going to say I'm fine, but quite honestly, I'm not fine. In closing, remember the 2 definitions, or when I spoke about a 58 black lesbian woman, I want us to get closer to intersectionality, because it is not just a buzzword. I've heard some people saying intersectionality is a buzzword. It is at the heart of any move towards social cohesion, nation building, and a shared identity. I gave you example of how one woman can be differentiated and discriminated and excluded based on this number of smaller things that we have. So there's a need for us to understand that women sometimes get the brunt twice, either as women and as black people, sometimes as black people, as women, and as people living with disability. These things, they really don't have shape. So we have rights, but are we happy? Here are the 3 questions that when you go home, sometimes probably a year from now, you can reflect on, and I'm going back to what I said I had. What is our song going forward? Are we still going to be all over the place, fight GBV here, fight this one here, fight racism here, fight, or do you want to have one song? Number 2, are we tolerant and acceptable of diverse opinions by others who happen to be different from us? But most importantly, we're talking about human rights, we're talking about all these things, national identity, cohesion. Are we perhaps not missing a step or jumping the gun? Because we have serious socioeconomic gaps that continues to divide South Africa. Maybe we need to sit down first and address socioeconomic differences, and then we can have a conversation. As always, when I speak, people say, academics, you are sitting on the ivory tower thinking this is how things need to be. Get to the bottom where people live, see how they live. Don't just go there to collect data for your masters, for your research. Let us be a nation that talks. Let us be a nation that questions the kind of rights we have and that can accommodate one another. And on that note, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mematse, for this very interesting presentation. I hope I'll be able to read what I've been writing, but I think you were correct. You are correct to say the purpose of this seminar is really for UNISA to self-reflect. We are celebrating 150 years. What has been our role over the last 150 years in promoting and honoring human rights, and what will be our role in the next 150 years? You said something very interesting by really taking us back to the preamble of the Constitution, because that's where we have to start in order for us to be able to understand what are the things that we need to look at. Interesting, towards the beginning of our discussion and even towards the end of it, you talk about the role of intersectionality as an approach for us to be able to deal with the various differences that we have and identities that we have. Interesting that you focus on the UNISA visions and UNISA vision and value, and talk about Botu as that philosophical concept, which you really ask us, do we know what it means? Are we able to live that particular philosophy that we talked about? Interesting that we talk about the African Charter on Human Rights, and your view is that it's one of the best among the various regional charters that we have. Maybe some of us will go back and have a look at the African Charter on Human Rights so that we understand what we're saying. Interesting what you said towards the end of your presentation when you said, we need a soul. Are we able to identify the struggle that we want to engage in? And I think what you are saying, if we are really serious about ensuring that we promote the culture of human rights, we need a song of some sort. And having that particular song, we need to also think back and say, are we tolerant of diverse view? I guess we are a university, a space where differences should be encouraged. University is a place where we have to even ensure that we differ, because that's the only way we can learn. We are a knowledge-producing institution, and therefore difference should be encouraged. Finally, and I think you are right, how do we talk about a culture of human rights when we haven't even addressed the socio-economic inequalities that are persistent in South Africa, and more specifically, those are aligned to our past. They might be in terms of race, in terms of gender, in terms of disability, and even in terms of geographic location. And I think we need that. And you are right. We need to talk. We need to discuss. We need to engage one another so that ultimately we are able to benefit from the human rights, principles, and values that are inscribed in our Constitution. Thank you very much. Let me then take this opportunity to call upon my colleague, as I indicated, Ndate Consul Gliani, who, as I indicated right at the beginning, is a director of systems and policies. For those who do not understand our department, leadership and transformation, consists of 5 divisions. First, it is scholarship, where we focus on scholarship of transformation and transformation of scholarship. Scholarship of transformation, where we produce scholarship relating to what we need to do in order to transform society and the institution. But we also are more interested in scholarship, the transformation of scholarship, where we engage the colleges in terms of what they need to do in order to transform the type of scholarship that they are producing. We have a unit responsible for institutional culture change, and that's basically around embedding a culture of human rights within the society. And the unit that is headed by Ntate is around when you have the knowledge, when you are changing the culture, you need to start focusing on the systems and policies. By the way, the policies are the way we do things. They are the most visible form of where we do things at this university. And culture, it's systems and policies around what are those systems and policies within the university that are impeding our attempt to transform the university. Then followed by governance. How do we collaboratively transform this particular institution? And that is the unit called Governance, Leadership, and Transformation. And then the next one is Discourse for Change, which is exactly what we are talking about. Discourse for change. We have to talk about change. And then finally, who are those people who are talking? That's when we talk about employment equity. And that's why we have. So you can see, colleagues, the structure of our department, indeed, it is huge, but in terms of human bodies, we don't have that. Ntate Glenn. Welcome, Ntate Glenn, to the stage, colleagues. For him to respond.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to address this very important session. Thanks, Dr. Bopape, for your leadership and for inviting me to the podium, and greetings to everyone in your varied eminences. Many months ago, while I was a student, I presented a paper at Senate Hall, I remember very well. And that paper was dealing with issues of race, gender, and class. And of course, I was a student, so the level was very low. After I presented it, it was a student forum anyway. After I presented it, a young lecturer, whose name will remain privileged, came in and he said, Comrade Consul has said everything that needed to be said for this session. And so I don't have anything to add or critique him on. I'll just consider other things. And he was known to be very naughty. So he went on a tangent completely. And in his naughty self. I'm afraid, Dr. Bopape, I'm going to be like that young student who you know very well. Because he was very problematic to Dr. Bopape there. Let me tell you why I feel like that young lecturer then. Apart from the fact that I think my colleague has covered a lot of ground and has given us food for thought. And I think we will engage with her as a forum. And the background is like this. When we were conceiving of this seminar, colleagues said that I would I consider to be a respondent? And my response specifically to Dr. Bopape and Prof. Kuno was that I'm very reluctant because you know my views, which are very radically opposed to how we conceive of some of the things. And they insisted that no, maybe we need to hear those voices. So if I go on a tangent, you must blame Dr. Bopape and Prof. Kuno. Those are the first two people. The second two people that you must blame is my colleagues, and I'm going to call them by name, is Mayor Gugu and Mayor Busisi. Because they called me last week or so, and I said, but colleagues, you know that I'm very reluctant. And they were sharing a phone, these soft phones, and they said, Mr. Kiani, we are not asking you, we are telling you. So colleagues, there are 4 colleagues that you must blame together with the DLT contingent. And so in my, and the last point that I want to make as a form of a preamble is that after being coerced to be a discussant, I then said, I'll do it under the cover of what we call academic freedom. That is being able to say whatever I say, even though I go on a tangent. I propose to advance 4 arguments, or 5, and you'll realize that indeed I'm going on a tangent, Memot. The first one is what I will call a lament. The second one is where I consider what I call forgetting. The third one is a critique overall of the human rights discourse. The third one is somehow maybe coming back close to the topic at hand, looking at universities, where I'll be looking at what are the effects on universities. And the last one is what must we do as a university. Let me start off, colleagues, by what I call a lament. Those of you who are familiar with the literature from the Levant province of humanity, what is popularly known as the Middle East, would know this set of literature of laments, which has been appropriated by the Jewish and Christian religions. But in fact, it is not limited to that. It is a literature of the region. And I'm lamenting because of what I call a process of forgetting. A process where, as a nation, we have, on our own, without being forced by any other nation, embarked on a process of forgetting our history. And in that process, we are erasing it. And let me juxtapose our forgetting and our erasure with what the international Jewish community does. That on the 27th of January every year, the international Jewry and the world commemorate the day when the Auschwitz concentration camp was liberated by the Soviet Army in 1945, when they found millions of Jewish people in the gas chambers and in the concentration camp of Auschwitz that was run by the Nazis. And that commemoration is still to this day commemorated as is, undiluted. I'm lamenting because we're meeting here today to talk about human rights. And for me, it is sad because we have embarked and are adding to the process of forgetting that what made us to meet is the massacre of Sharpeville and Langa in 1960. We are no longer talking about that as the whole country. 3 months down the line, we'll be talking about Youth Day. And if you can ask young people who will be meeting at the parks, why are you meeting on this day? They'll say no, to celebrate and not to commemorate. On the 24th of September, we'll be meeting in what we call Heritage Day. And some have even taken further and called it Bride Day. And as a nation, we are participants in that process of forgetting. And let me tell you what forgetting does and the scholarship on forgetting. We forget by erasing, and sometimes we forget by remembering in order to dilute and to divert. And what we have embarked on as a country is that of remembering in order to dilute and to divert. Just like we have done and are doing with the reflections about Sharpeville and Langa and Orlando, such that the generation to come, if we ask them what 21st of March will be, the only thing they will know about it is that it is Human Rights Day, without understanding that it is Sharpeville, Langa, and Soweto. And that is where my lament comes in, colleagues, and that is why I was very reluctant to become a discussant. But let us take it further, because we are in a university. What does this forgetting do? This forgetting leads to what other scholars would call dehistorizing. And therefore, we are dehistorizing our existence as a people. We are also involved in the depoliticization of days of commemoration. Lastly, we are involved in the depersonalization of these commemorations. Just like Memoki was saying, a 58-year-old lesbian has been found killed. That person has got no name. That person has got no abode. That person has got no families who are hurt by that. It is just a statistic. And so we have depersonalized March 21. No one died in March 21 because we are now talking about human rights. No one died in Sharpeville. No one died in Langa. No one was arrested in Orlando on that day. And that is the dehistorizing, depoliticization, and the depersonalization that is taking place and that we are unfortunately involved in. And sometimes I say unwittingly so. The third point that I want to mention is a critique of the human rights discourse. And I think on that one, Memoki has really gone into the depth of this critique. The comparison between the UN charters and the African charters and even the South African Constitution. But I want to approach this critique from another angle. Having mentioned the dehistorization, the depoliticization, and the depersonalization. And the angle that I want to take is that as a result of this depoliticization and so on, the debate has been shifted from history, from political philosophy, and from politics into the realm of the law. So we are no longer talking about history. We are no longer talking about people and justice. We are talking about protocols and charters and how may we look into mechanisms of monitoring them, of implementing them, and so on. You may have realized that as a result of that, our discourse as a nation then revolves around what I call officialdom. It is the officialdom of the international protocols, be they the International Human Rights Convention, the Sustainable Development Goals, and so on and so forth. It is around that. So the shift from history, the shift from philosophy, the shift from politics render it into the liberal discourse. Because as Memoki and others will tell you, law in a capitalist society becomes the preserve of the ruling class. So Groot Boom can have a court order from the Constitutional Court, but the ruling class will say there is no money, and nothing that Groot Boom has won in the Constitutional Court will be realized, because the hegemony in the society is that of the capitalist class. Richtersveld will also win a court order about the land, but the land will not be restored to the community because immediately the property clause kicks in, and therein the contradictions of the law and the demonstration that the law always favors the ruling class. And so by moving away from history into the realm of the law, we have unwittingly moved into the realm of constraint, the realm of austerity, the realm of limited resources. Because the authorities will tell Groot Boom that we would like to honor this, but there is no money in the fiscus. And why is there no money in the fiscus? Because the fiscus has been determined and predetermined by the economic policy of the land, which exercises austerity, which dictates that company taxes will be low, and therefore the fiscus would not have enough resources to build a house for Groot Boom. So we can therefore see the shift and the diluting. In our case, we remember, we forget by remembering, because our remembering is in the form of diluting and diverting. The third point that I want to raise, and that is where now I am playing with my career, but I will say I'm in a university, and a university must respect academic freedom. So what has been the effect on us as universities? What has been the effect on academics as we shift? The major effect is that universities have lost their independence. And colleagues, we are not aware of that. We are unconscious that universities have lost their independence. Interesting, the loss of independence is not happening as it happened in the Eastern Europe or in post-colonial Africa, where the government with tanks moves in, appoints vice-chancellors, appoints professors, and so on. Our loss of independence is on our own plate, in the sense that we have given away our agency, and we revolve around officialdom. I can make the last bet on my dime. Let's look at our study material. Our study material is always changing. When it changes, and you say we are making changes to our curriculum, is when we hoy in the Sustainable Development Goals. Thus, we become tactiles of officialdom. When they move from MDGs, development studies must change their study guides and then incorporate the Sustainable Development Goals, and so on and so forth. Academics, we have given away the space to be independent, to come up with the material that we have to come up with, independent of officialdom. Now, colleagues might say, but where is the evidence of that? Apart from the very materials that we have, the higher education sector as a whole has been affected by that. And this is one of the key examples. As a result of dumping down history, of forgetting, of diluting, we have seen, for instance, the study of history starting to ebb in terms of importance. And in the place of history, there has emerged, and I hope that I'm not going to offend colleagues here, but it's because we are in the halls of academia. There has emerged heritage studies. So we are no longer studying history. When we built Sol Plaatje University, we say Sol Plaatje University will focus on heritage studies. Why? Because we don't want to have the Northern Cape and the city of Kimberley as being the remembrance place of Sobukwe and Sol Plaatje. We want to dilute it so that I struggle with the term. They call it musealization. So Sol Plaatje and Sobukwe will be turned into museums, not as symbols of resistance. The legacy of Sol Plaatje is reduced into a museum in Kimberley. The legacy of Sobukwe is reduced into a museum in Kimberley. And then there must be an academic base and support for that diluting of that legacy. And hence we have heritage studies instead of history. We move away from a critique of capitalism and then start to say, how can we make the system work? And we build the University of Mpumalanga and say it will focus on tourism, it will focus on development studies. Because we do not want to deal with the poverty that is in there. We want to come up with development modules. What are the development modules that the universities should come up with? And so my critique and self-critique of us as universities is that we have lost our agency and we have become part of the diluting and the diverting of the real challenges that are facing us. And this then shapes our teaching, our research endeavors, orientation, and output. If we can do a study of the master's and doctoral thesis that we developed in the past 10 years, in the areas of development studies and so on, there are common threads. The focus is on SDGs. At some stage, the focus was on NEPAD. The focus was, so academics then follow officialdom. Their research is itself a tactile of officialdom. Instead of academics being the ones that show the light and go into unresearched phenomenon, we research that which officialdom has bequeathed on us. The last point that I want to make, therefore, is what must we do as universities? I want to argue that universities, academics, must reclaim their voices. I want to argue, colleagues, that we have lost our voices as universities. And that goes for commentators and many others. Recent events in the country have shown that. Let me become even more controversial about how academics and commentators have become tactiles of officialdom. And I'm taking risks as I go on and on. It's fine. There was a march on Monday. For the record, I don't agree with the organizers. But as a pedestrian intellectual, I cannot allow my assessment to be informed by a government speak. And this is the point that I'm making. Monday was never built to become a march. Monday was built to become whatever it was. Government comes and say it was a flop. Academics and commentators come and echo, it was a flop, it was a flop, it was a flop. It is what Aubrey Machiti called echo chambers. What we are failing to analyze as academics was that apart from June last year, when we have that looting and so on, this was the first time before 1994 that we saw something like this. And what does it mean? Besides the personalities that we may not like, who are noise makers, who don't have respect for the elders, called elders' names and all that, we fail to analyze what Monday meant, because we are echo chambers of officialdom. Our analysis is just that it was a failure. What does Monday mean? And I'm still to get a fresh academic, independent analysis of what happened on Monday. In the last 2 days, I'm just hearing academics as echoing what government is saying. And that's what I call by us reclaiming our voice, irrespective of the differences with the players that we might have, objectively, from our independent analysis, what does Monday tell us? And I'm still waiting to hear that voice. The second point that I want to argue, therefore, is that we must endeavor to rehistorize our development as a country. No one, Dr. Bopape, will ever charge us of being in breach if we say we want to focus our reflections on Sharpeville 1960. As academics, June 16 is coming. Are we going to reflect on the uprising in June 16? Or are we going to fall into the tired notion of youth unemployment? What can we do for young people? And say that, no, June 16 has passed, we are not going to reflect on it. September 24 is going to come. Are we going to reflect on Ushaka Day, which we have forgotten? We have even forgotten that September 24 was Ushaka Day. If I was to confront all of us to say, where does September 24 starts? We'll all say, no, it's Heritage Day started in 1994, which is not true. We have forgotten about Ushaka Day. We are even vulgarizing it more by calling it Bride Day. And we are participants in these things. So, colleagues, like I say, I'm standing in order to lament. I'm standing in order to critique. I'm standing in order to point out that as academics, we need to problematize the fact that we are now participants in the historization, depoliticization, depersonalization, and dare I say, de-academization of our process. We have become tactiles, and therefore, this is not to say, let us not talk about human rights. It's a very important topic in and of itself. And I would have wanted us to engage in the discourse and critique of human rights in and of itself. But when it is coming in as a replacement of, as a displacement of, as a diluting of, then it has got a problem. Thank you very much. I'm sorry.
No, thank you very much. I mean, I don't agree that we coerced you It was good that we hear this voice. It is good that we hear this voice. It is good what you have just said, Ntate Kleane, and thank you, I think, colleagues, for coercing him to ultimately agree to do this. What you have just said is a mouthful for a lot of us. To say you are actually lamenting the fact that we are, as you indicated, depoliticizing an event that is so crucial for us to understand our history. You are so right that I think we need to begin that process of reclaiming. As we reclaim our African intellectual space, we need to reclaim in our academic space and begin that process. Earlier when you started, I said, as far as I'm concerned, a university is a space where dissent is encouraged. We don't have to agree, all of us, but dissent should be encouraged so that ultimately we're able to create the new knowledge that will take the country further. You spoke about 4 things, which is lamenting, as you said, critiquing the whole notion of human rights, the discourse, and how you think the problem is that we are following officialdom, but we're not doing what we are supposed to do, and as a result, we are falling into the liberal discourse. You spoke about the university itself and how it has lost touch with reality. It is no longer independent, and I guess you would have encouraged colleagues who are here to begin that process of reclaiming the space that we are all in. Colleagues, there it is. Can we give the 2 speakers a round of applause? Will you be fine, or for the sake of the streaming, you would want the 2 colleagues to come on board? What do you think is the best? They should come, or they are fine there? All right, colleagues, come on in that time when they're coming on stage. Questions for them, comments, suggestion, what you have picked up today. I want also, while they are coming on stage, to acknowledge the presence of my colleague, Mematlare. Thank you for coming. We really appreciate your presence. Mematlare is the Executive Director of the Department of Institutional Advancement. Thank you very much, Mematlare. Colleagues, question for the 2 speakers? Mematlare, Professor Nkosi, Mematlare, Karen. And my brother, in that order.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Program Director, and to the other speakers. I caught the train already on the move, but what I got, I think I will just make comments from both speakers. Starting from the actual department that is leading this topic around human rights. Because for me, as you see in the department, it says it is leading change. For me, names have got deeper meaning, what you call something. And then you move from leading change, you get into human rights. And we've heard what has taken place over time at the University of South Africa. And then we also heard comments around what we are doing as participants and the changes that are happening. I will start now with the last speaker, because what he said actually echoed, because I think Professor Sipho Mantulo actually raised the very same thing around Sharpeville, what we are choosing to call things nowadays. To say, as an academic institution, I think we are now choosing to be politically correct, if I may say so, because we try and align ourselves with whose ear is listening, so to say. So I think what has been said today is that how then do we, as an institution, go to the movement, to being this movement, to creating those songs or telling these stories the right way, as we are saying. Hence, I went back to say change. What has change got to do with it? If you go through the processes of change, you go through different stages. Are we bold enough as well as a university to say, have we marked these stages to say, if you are going through change, you must at some point feel pain, you must at some point call something by the way it's supposed to be called, until you get to the healing stage. And then you are able now to be comfortable with whatever the new position is. Hence I said, I start with the department to say, for us, have we really gone through the stages of change as a university to say, during this stage, whether it's a storming stage or whatever stage it is, this is what we will do. You touched on, say, the issues around, say, I will simplify it. Let's look at the bathrooms, toilets. To say, to this day, I think we have maintained the status quo. There is a female, there is a male. We don't have like the unisex to say if we are progressive. And if we are talking about human rights, it's not only that, I think we have done better in terms of accessing of the lifts and so on. But it just, for me, the challenge is around really getting into grips with the issues as they are, confronting now the rights that we have as a university. We say the rights of human beings. I mean, we put up that article coming from the different areas in saying, what has the university done over time? We've allowed, of course, communities to access the education. But have we really unpacked that in saying how many people can access us comfortably so? I think we have to a certain degree. So my comment was, or is that we need to go deeper with the issues as we do them and confront them, irrespective. Of course, we'll set things in place. If we are now feeling the pain, then what do we do? What will be the interventions at each stage as we go through this process of change? Thank you.
Change is pain, indeed. I agree with you, Mema Clara. Do you want to, or let me take this and then you'll comment. Professor Nkosi.
Thank you, Program Director. Thank you, colleagues, for your inspiring presentations. I've just got it's a comments, but then you are free to engage. It's like, we'll start with Dr. Bopape. We are talking about transformation and change. We talk, my worry is that we don't implement. I will give you one example where we're talking about language in the country. I've got SLPs in African languages. I've got 4,000 staff members, but only less than 100 to register. What's wrong with us? That is one for Dr. Bopape. And then Ms. Muki, you spoke about so many factors that affect us as human beings. I want to ask you, how do we correct it? You have mentioned so many items, I don't want to list. We now want solutions because we talk, we want to implement. And Mr. Consul, you made a good example of March 20. You made a good example of March 20. And then when you look into the whole issue, there are so many factors that affected what happened on the 20th of March. It was a strategic day. If you look into it, following March 21, many people signed leave because of March 21. And then secondly, I come from the health background. We always say prevention is better than cure. Thirdly, it demonstrated that South Africa has got resources. How we use resources, it's up to us as South Africans to say, let's do the right thing. So mine is mainly comment, but then you are free to engage.
Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning, colleagues. It's so exciting. Mr. Tliani Memuki, firstly, Mr. Tliani, those words dehistorizing, I hope I've got that word right, depoliticizing, depersonalization. As you spoke those words, I felt a heavy burden. I felt a weight on my shoulders sitting here. Because what these words imply for everybody here, not me, not this chair, everybody here. Mr. Tliani, you say we are participating. I want to add to that word participating, I want to add that we are complicit in this. We are complicit. When it's happening on our watch, we are complicit. And guess what? History, you can say historical, history is watching, will be watching us. It's on our watch. How does UNISA disrupt this place that we find ourselves, this place of being, this place where we are? How? How do we, Memuki, compose our song, moving from the song that Mr. Tliani spoke about, that lament, a sad song, that lamenting. How do we move there? Memuki, you spoke beautifully. What you asked the question, what is our song going forward? I like that. Music to me is in my blood. It's everything to me. How do we fight this? How do we become tolerant of differing, diverse opinions? How? How do we become tolerant? It's always that how question, like Prof said. And we're missing a step. I can even take it into my field with affirmative action, missing the step of taking into account in affirmative action the socioeconomic status as a key point of discrimination in our country. So how do we do this? I would like to, because I enjoy dialogue. We have so little space where we can put these things on the table and have dialogues. I think we must encourage them. We must listen. But not only listen, we must hear. What is meant by this word diluting? When our, where our country is going, the dilution to a bride day. What does that mean? What are we teaching our children for tomorrow? Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Maybe introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you, Chair. My name is Mafeno Pora, and I'm from the Center for Lifelong Learning, where we do provisioning of the short courses.
Welcome.
Right, thank you very much. I just have 2 questions here, but then if I may just comment briefly by saying that this morning, in fact, as of yesterday, I'm sure you'd have seen or heard on the news about a new legislation in Uganda wherein harsher measures are going to be taken against those who are regarded as outcasts on the basis of their sexual orientation. So my question really is there a model of practice that we can adopt? And when I say we, I'm talking about the society at large, not so much just within the university, that we can adopt in order to really inculcate this whole value system of human rights. Of course, I guess going with the obligations thereof as well. The first speaker spoke about social cohesion, and again, in the larger media, there's been a critique of our political leaders in South Africa of not having been able to set a tone for social cohesion. And I do seem to remember that during the Mandela era, it was almost, taken as a fact that he embodied everything that had to do with equality and hope, and therefore, by implication, there was an attempt at cohesion under him. And under Dr. Thabo Mbeki, there was the African Renaissance, which again had a theme to it. Subsequent to that, Mr. Zuma's administration, as well as the current president now, Ramaphosa, there does not seem to be any sort of messaging coming out of the presidency or the administration to set the tone for anything, either for the continent or for the country in particular. So that question still stands to say, is there a particular model? And lastly, in the case of UNISA, for instance, I shudder, because one day I think we are going to be taken to the Human Rights Commission on the basis on which we treat our students in particular, and I'm glad that Mema Tlari is here. This morning before I came through, there was a presentation of a BMR study on perceptions of UNISA to its stakeholders. It made for a worrisome reading, something that we all know. So my feeling is, even within ourselves as a university, we really have to look at ourselves in a mirror and ask ourselves hard questions to say, are we here to serve or are we self-serving? And this goes for everyone, admin as well as the academics, because clearly the research results are pointing to the fact that we are what one would call a grudge purchase, very much like an insurance, where you have to part with your hard-earned money, but you really don't want to deal with those people. Lastly, I want to ask the role of the media and Tate Tliani on what you were lamenting about, setting the tone, to say what is the role of the media really in what you have been saying? Don't you think that they have usurped all the powers that are there, and they make us all sing a swan song as soon as they have set the tone on whatever topic that is in the society? I thank you.
Thank you very much, colleagues. Who would want to start first? Oh, Mathieu.
We're speaking about having a conversation, and this is the beginning of the conversation. But I can almost assure you, based on my experience, that we are still talking. It's a talk shop. I remember when I was a student, I was a young activist belonging to a student political formation many years ago. We used to say we don't want talk shops, we want action. When I started teaching, that's what we said. Today we are saying this, and I bet when we leave that door, we are going to another seminar in celebration of 150 years. And I wanna, before I get to Mema Tlari, I just wanna take a bite a bit on what you said. And I said, how I wish I was given a blank check to come and speak today. Remember when I started, I said I'm one of the people who used to criticize the Constitution of South Africa that everyone hails as the most progressive. And the pain came from post TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which is a model that other countries are adopting. And every chance I get, I used to say, don't adopt that model, because somehow you are patching the wound, you are not getting into it. When you look at the CODESA, the negotiation that birthed our constitution, you know a number of compromises that were made. And I thought, that could be the interim. Maybe a little bit while later, while we can trust one another, other people can just give us a chance as people who are oppressed to sit down and really leave our pain and explain what we want. So if I was given a blank check, I watched TV, I was given pointers, right? And as a good, obedient student, I followed the pointers to the letter. So I was watching TV, I think on the 21st, right? Mzwakhe Mbuli lamented the same thing, that when we talk about Sharpeville massacre, if you ask me, do we know the names of those people? He said they have names, they have memorations, you go there, their names are there, but none of the leaders came out and say that. So now, the Government of National Unity said that it's Human Rights Day and it remains Human Rights Day. And I told you about the problem of the copying and pasting of human rights, the Bill of Rights, from the 1948. You can even count the number of years, from 48 to 1994, how many years things had changed and so forth and so on. Mama Tlhare, you spoke about healing. How do we go deeper? Change, being politically correct and so forth. When I come from the NGO sector, where we deal with reality, what you see. And then I joined academia. The first thing I had was niche area. Each college will have a niche area where you need to focus your research on. That niche area becomes very important because it grounds you to be an NRF-rated professor. And when you are not an NRF-rated professor, they look down on you. You can go talk and analyze the strike on Monday and come up with groundbreaking things. The VC and the VP for research, you're like, research output, publish or perish. So what do? Copy and paste that. It's like, okay, this is the buzzword, let me go there. So the day the university understands its role, that we come in different forms, there are those whose aspiration is to become professors of research and write thousands of books and articles that no one reads, but reads for the purpose of referencing. We will have won half of the battle. Here we write, Rangola Batum. And then we even pride ourselves. I've been quoted by 7 people, and those 7 people are just quoting you for the purposes of achieving the masters. We don't come with things that change society. So that's where the problem is. The minute you enter academia and you hear publish or perish, hey, let me write. All these issues that are very important, we will see them later. I can't read my own writing as well. And then Prof. Nkosi asked how to correct so many wrongs. And I think individually we know what matters to us. And individually we are aware. I've spoken about one example. You wake up every day, you hear about gender-based violence, femicide, statistics on rape, trafficking, and so forth. So when I made example of the songs of women of 1956, of heroes and heroines of 1968, 1960s, kind of like each year we need to pick what is important. But we find ourselves, and also this is because of social media, where we have hashtags, we want to be seen. But I think the generation that came just after the 70s, we haven't really sat down and ask ourselves, if you ask us, except for the fees must fall students, what is that we have actually sat down and come out with? There was a time I was pushing, I said earlier, abortion, and I want to show you that human rights can be called human rights in one language, but in our culture can be called something. So I went on a field study to 5 African countries. I went to Zambia, I went to Rwanda, I went to Uganda and others, just to understand what abortion is. And my supervisor had said to me, if you can have that in mother tongue, we will know what is it. He said in Setswana, to remove the womb. And he said it's such a sensitive topic. But when I went to the field, starting in Botswana, and I met a group of chiefs, Makoshi, they said to me, You know what? We have always had abortion in our culture, but it's something that you talk about in the private. It's a private matter, it's a family matter. The elders said that, for instance, if you're going to, it could be determined that your child will be disabled or will be an albino. You know how society was back then. They will abort you. Or if you are a young unmarried woman and you get pregnant, they will be scared that, hey, no one is going to lobola you. So you need to abort so that, you know, in the eyes of the public, you can be intombi. So they said, yes, we have abortion, but for other reasons, but it's not called that. It's not spoken like you want to speak about it. So we speak about it as a human rights, but when you go deeper in our culture, it's other things. The same way when you go talk to people and tell them that female genital mutilation, it's not right. There are cultures that are when we were promoting the African Protocol on the Rights of Women, they say, Nana, you don't know what you're talking about. We take pride in this culture of testing virginity, of doing all these other things. So it's different things for different people. But I think in our smaller groups and in our communities, and I think in this unit, we can determine what are we focusing on. You can list 10 items and say, yesterday we heard that we're a society that forgets. We want to remember. We want to call the public holidays by what they are. So next year, we're going to see a different thing. There's no human rights celebration, but it's Sharpeville massacre. There's no Bride Day celebration, and so forth and so on, so that we can get closer to the truth. And I think it links to what you're saying. How do you compose your song? What talks to your heart? What talks to my heart and the song I'm composing, I'm all about reproductive and sexual health, for sterilization, and I find people of like-mindedness, and we try to deal with it in a smaller way. So I think it depends on what speaks to your heart, what really stresses you, or what gives you sleepless night. I know that people who get worried because they are told you must decolonize the module, you must transform the module, and they don't feel it. And because it is forced, that's why this year we'll add MDG, next year SDG, the other year we add this. But if we really get to understand, and I spoke to Dr. Bopape about it earlier, that it is very difficult if you went to university, depending on which university you went to. We started talking about decolonization at UNISA and transformation. We're speaking about Professor Mahau those years. And at that time, he was even misunderstood because transformation and change are difficult concepts. The simple way he used to define it was fold your hands. And when you fold your hands, you go like this. And then he say, fold them the other way. And then you try to do this, and you become uncomfortable. Issues of transformation, issues of decolonization, issues of that we want to talk about are really, really, excuse me, uncomfortable issues. I forgot the name. I didn't get it right. Can I, please? The gentleman, and I was talking about that, calling people ladies and gentlemen, from the Center for a Lifelong Learning. You said whether there's a model of practice that can be adopted. The reason I've been against the model of Truth and Reconciliation Committee is because we are different people, we are different nations, we have different experiences. Our colonialism is even worse. You started with the Roman Dutch, then come, the British, then there's apartheid. But when you go to other countries, it's just British and democracy in the 60s. So I think the best way is to compose your own song, to develop a model that fits your unique circumstances. And you say that the government has not set a tone for social cohesion. When you wait for the government, you wait until the kingdom comes. When I learned about democracy in primary school, they said it is the government of the people, by the people, for the people. So who needs to set the tone? It is the people. The president and the minister, they are there, they are setting their own agenda. We're talking about Grootboom. When they talk about budgets, if you really follow budgets, you will see how much goes into defense. And then you ask yourself, is our country in danger? And you check how much goes to health, you'll cry. Tears of pain to say billions and billions go into defense. All these trucks and weapons of mass destruction and whatever cost so much, and the government invest in that so that they can send the troops to DRC and other places. And these are the topics that the people don't want to talk about. If we have to choose between health and the soldiers going to DRC, what will you choose? Obviously, you choose health, you'll choose education. So if we wait for the government to set the tone, nothing will happen. And I would like to end it there. It seems that it didn't end well. Thank you.
Sorry.
No, thanks, Doc, and thanks, Mayor Moki. I'll try to be very short and then maybe just pick up on points of emphasis. No, thanks, Mayor Makare. And just to acknowledge that Mayor Makare and I worked for a long time at the city of Tshwane when I was speaking differently from now. It's because this allows me the space. There, I had to toe the line and even defend it. I don't have anything to add, but I like your concept about how do we become a movement? How do academics, universities become a movement that is able to create new songs? I want to join that. And I think, Prof. Nkosi, that's something that, how do we become a movement as universities? A movement, remember, one of the reasons why in the North we are very critical of northern centers of learning, but one of the reasons why they created the whole notion of tenure is in order that academics could be insulated from threats internally and otherwise, have job security and able to speak freely. And as Edward Said would say, speak truth to power. And I think we are not exercising that. I mean, for instance, here at UNISA, this is why professors are at P5. We have not asked ourselves. It's because so that they are free, they have full tenure, they are not bound to contract and so on, they are able to speak, unlike some of us who are bound to contract. But the professoriate has been packed at that level so that it has full tenure, it is free. And I think we need to nudge each other to practice that. Prof, you talked about, and you jolted my thinking, and this is not original thinking, I must acknowledge. You jolted my thinking when you talked about Monday as in between the Sunday and a holiday, and therefore people turned it into a long weekend, which is true. And those are the kind of analysis that we want. Here's another analysis that somebody, I think, said in passing, and I want to stay with it. That for me, and this is to demonstrate that when I say, let's not follow government speak when we criticize Monday, let's follow our own tone, is that Monday was a dilution of March 21. Because all the focus for March this year went into Monday. And March 21, despite my criticism of it not being Human Rights Day, but being Sharpeville Day, it was diluted. It was diverted. Such that all the talk for this week, before and after, which should have gone into this debate that we are having, didn't take place because we were talking about Monday. And I asked myself, if we call ourselves, or if people call themselves the left, and they dilute March 21 into something else. So we can now see that the dilution is not just coming from ruling classes. It can also come from supposed progressive voices. And I can tell you, March 21, 2023 was diluted completely. And that is something that I lament so much. Without wasting any time, Mekaren, you are wrong. You are right. Sorry to say that we are not just participants, but we are complicit. And I think that is heavy enough to jolt us into a critical self-reflection. And your question, I think, about how do we disrupt that dilution, complicity, is answered by what Memakari is saying. Let us become a movement that is able to reclaim our voices and be able to say things in their correct way and be able to write new songs. Yeah, the last point is from Tatepora. Yes, about the media, how it is diluting. The media in South Africa is owned, there is what we call media concentration. It's owned by a few companies that have got certain rights. In fact, in South Africa, scholars of media studies will tell you that there is no diversity. They all echo chambers. And that is not surprising because when you read Chomsky and Herman, they will tell you media is there to manufacture consent. Media is there to echo what officialdom says. So I'm not so much worried or hopeful about mainstream media, to be very frank with you. In my other life before I became a spokesperson at Tshwane, I was a media studies person. I'm not losing my hair further. I've lost it. I'm not losing it further, thinking that the mainstream media will become otherwise. They will remain what they are. They'll continue the diluting, the diverting, and all that. My cry is about this space. This space is supposed to be a space of independent thinking. And so even if the media goes this way, even when they give us platform to speak on those mainstream media, we must use them to speak independently. Like Memakari was saying, Prof. Mantula was speaking freely in that very space. So that is my cry, for us to use the spaces that we have and other spaces that may exist to advance independent critical thinking. And by the way, in South Africa, one of the laments that I have, that in South Africa, critical thinking, if we are not careful, is being seen as if you are anti. Whereas critical thinking is that. It is pushing the boundaries. It is in the Socratic mode of us questioning and questioning and questioning and coming up with views that might be unconventional. And remember, it is unconventional views that advance societies. No society has ever advanced through echo chambers, nothing. Societies are always advanced through dissent, as you say, Dr. Wopa. It is when we dissent, when we disagree, of course, within the realms of respecting each other, that we are able to advance as a people. And that is what I am crying for. So my lament is that this space must be reclaimed. Thank you, Doctor.
Before you go, I think you haven't answered this question. This question, and I think even the two of you must respond to this question relating to the law that has been passed in Uganda relating to the marginalization and imprisonment of the
Yes. Yeah. And again, talking about universities, I'm hoping that Makerere will speak out. I'm hoping that the colleagues at Makerere will speak out, because the rest of society might be intimidated. But academics should not allow themselves to be intimidated, because speaking intellectually, that is a backward trend. When the world, when humanity is advancing, when humanity is being freed from bigotry, then we have a country that is punting itself to be developmental, coming up with such laws. It is what other colleagues will call the policing of the body. Should the body be policed the way that Museveni is wanting to do? So I think that academics in Uganda and others should be able to speak out against the bigotry and the backwardness that I think is there. Because, you know, in society, in conclusion, Dr. Bopapa, one of the things that we conflate is to conflate what should be or what should not be with what we may not like as individuals. And rulers have got a tendency to conflate that. So yeah, thank you very much. I liked your comment, Memoki, about writing what is in your heart. Prof. Catherine Odora Hoppers, when he was mentoring us somewhere else, not here at UNISA, would say, Kiani, you must write what itches you. And I've always taken that to heart.
I am an alumni of Makerere University. This, my studies way before I was studying human rights and democratization in Africa. And I did a stint at the African Commission on Human and People's Rights in Gambia. And this is what I've observed about African countries. And you have heard me several times speaking about abortion. When I started talking about abortion a long time ago, this is what I understand, and I'm gonna link, because issues such as abortion, issues such as the right of gays, lesbians, issues such as women having agency and deciding on their body, when you look at a number of African countries, this is my observation. Almost all African countries were colonized, right? And their laws were based on the criminal code of either Britain, Portugal, if you are Portuguese speaking, and if you are French speaking, for France. The British criminal code is 1861. The Portuguese, somewhere like in the 1860s, 17, you know. And this is what I've always wondered about African countries. Then they fought for liberation. Many African countries in the 60s and probably 70s, South Africa is just the last born. But as they were removing themselves from the shackles of colonizers, they are holding on to these laws, despite the fact that in Portuguese-speaking country, in Portugal, in France, and in Britain, laws have changed. Laws on abortion, laws on accepting that we are people of different sexual orientation. It has always been the case. 85% of African countries are still relying on the laws that were passed in the 17th and 18th century. That's one. Two, when you look at their constitution, they become smarter. On the sometimes they say it's the Bill of Rights, sometimes they call it the constitutional principles. So if it's constitutional principle, if the rights are in the constitutional principles, they're not per se binding. But if they happen to have constitutions that have rights that are binding, when you look at the non-discrimination clause, it excludes certain things. It doesn't have sexual orientation or sexuality than South Africa. And then they're able to go to court. The same way Botswana doesn't want to abolish death penalty because it is entrenched in the constitution. Furthermore, they do ratify and sign international conventions which abolishes these practices, which acknowledge people of sexual minorities and so forth. But when you ratify an international convention, you will see that that's what we call reservation. So you read the document, it's beautiful, you like it, but you don't like that aspect that talks about sexual minorities. You are allowed, in terms of the Vienna law on the law of Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties, like you were saying, law, it's like that. So they go and say, we are ratifying this, we are bound by it, but we reserve this article that allows sexual orientation, and Uganda has been that country. Do you have prominent human rights lawyers in Uganda? Sylvia Tamale, Professor Sylvia Tamale, who used to be the Dean of Law at Makerere, and Professor Joe Oloka Onyango, have written articles, have entered into statements under the Center for Human Rights, because people have been jailed way before without the law being passed. And I think those sentiments have gone nowhere. Now, the question is, what is that we need to do as members of the African Union? But we also see that our leaders are very quiet. We know what has been happening in Zimbabwe. And then we start saying, no, that's what we call quiet diplomacy. That's what we call sovereignty. We can't go and interfere in the affairs of another state. But in terms of legal mechanisms, there's something that can be done. You want to win it in the country, you can go and challenge the constitutionality of that law in Uganda. You'll never win because the Constitution allows the flexibility to be able to make it constitutional compliant. Now you need funds. Can you go to the African court? Who's going to fund that? And going back to Grootboom, we can go to the African court and win. But the question is implementation goes back. Can you impose sanctions to that country? If you look at the number of countries that might not have gone to the stage of outlawing sexual minorities or the rights of gay and lesbian, but their quietness is so loud that they say, we are not going to allow them, we are not going to pass law, but we do not want to create South Africa, which reminds me of the time when in South Africa we're trying to talk about allowing prostitution in South Africa, because whether we like it or not, and see how we can regulate it and make the country safe. Leaders of various African countries said that they don't know what is to happen with South Africa, starting from abortion to marijuana, to prostitution, to a number of things. So African leaders, in silence, the majority of them are agreeing with what is happening in Uganda. And therefore, was probably, we need a song of how, can we always depend on the UN, China, America to impose sanction? What is the song that we want to sing when it comes to that? Are we brave enough? UNISA as an institution of higher learning, which has students in Uganda, and I know that they sometimes have visit in Uganda. Have we expressed an opinion as champions of human rights? Because maybe the more noise we make in Africa, not outside Africa, we need to get our house in order, the more they will listen. But we don't know. But also when you check the majority of citizens in this country, almost majority of them, they don't agree with the rights of sexual minorities. So it's kind of like, a tug of war being placed between a rock and a hard place. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Looking at the time, can I say, let's continue the debate when we have lunch, right? But before I do so, let me try to answer Prof. Nkosi the question relating to what is it that we are doing specifically as the unit. This is really relevant to the colleagues who are here. As a Department of Leadership and Transformation, our sole purpose, we can't punish anybody. We don't have that power. What we do, we are created in the Office of the Vice Chancellor. Our purpose is to conceptualize what we mean as an institution relating to transformation. This seminar, the discussion around it is to broaden and refine the conceptualization of transformation. That's number one. Number two, we monitor the implementation of the transformation plan as approved by Council. We monitor that particular transformation plan as approved by Council. We do highlight trends that we are picking within the institution and within the sector. We sensitize whoever reads our report to say this is what is happening in terms of earlier. When I was talking to my colleagues, we spoke about resignation and we spoke a lot about it. And that, what I was sharing with you was basically what we are doing, which is part and parcel of identifying trends within the university and inform the powers that be. In this case, the powers that be is Senate, the powers that be is Council, together with its committees, as well as the Vice Chancellor. 3, we do report, and our reports, as I indicated, go there. Lucky enough, we are lucky as a UNISA that at Senate, transformation report is a standing item. I believe by submitting our report to Senate, Senate must engage our report. It is Senate who will then say, we see in this particular college there's no movement. Senate must say something about it. Senate must say something because our reports are there, are submitted to Senate. Our reports are submitted to 4 committees of Council. Human Resource Committee of Council, Social and Ethics Committee of Council, which is our mother body, which is our mother committee where we report to, Social and Ethics Committee of Council, ASACOC, we do report to ASACOC, we do report to IF regularly. It is those bodies that must start talking about the implementation of transformation in UNISA. We can only provide them with evidence because we have evidence of what is happening within the. We can't punish anybody. We report to the Vice Chancellor, we do report to Council. Unless Council and the Vice Chancellor punish those that are not transforming, our hands are tied. We don't have line responsibility to anybody. But 2, transformation is everybody's responsibility. Because the plans are there, it is the responsibility of the ED and the portfolio manager. Because what we do collect information. We don't collect information from the EDs, we do collect information on transformation from the vice principals. We do liaise with them. All our reports that we are submitting to Council and those committees are actually gathered from the vice principal. We can hold them accountable, but through the office of the Vice Chancellor. Unfortunately, we can't go there because of the capacity that we have. We don't have the capacity, but that's what it is. That's what we do, colleagues. And our involvement within the sector, that's basically what the sector is all about. Transformation is everybody's business. As you are aware, the performance agreement of any Vice Chancellor within South Africa contain an item on transformation, and that's what we do. Yes.
Let me say something, Dr. Bopape, because I cannot say it after you have wrapped up. And I think here I'm also in my element of being a bit controversial.
That's fine.
Prof. Mkos, here is something, and Dr. Bopape will tell you, is one of my things that I raise up. And it is my observation, I might be wrong. So if I'm spectacularly wrong, I'll go out with some embarrassment. And it worries me, we are known nationally as the Center for Decolonial Studies. I think there's that acknowledgement. Even when we host people here, their preambles is that I'm glad to be here and all that. But my observation is that we talk decolonization, but we don't do decolonization. That's the problem at UNIS. So you'll find Kleane writing a lot about decolonization, being acknowledged as the scholar for decolonization. We go to Kleane's department, the materials are just the same. What is happening? There's a disjoint that we do not practice what we write about, we don't practice what we preach. And I think that is a challenge that, Prof. Nkosi, I want to sound back to yourselves as practicing academics, to say that it is not, otherwise, you know what it becomes, and that's the criticism, sometimes uncomfortable criticism that I have against decolonial studies. Dr. Bopape knows it, so I'm not embarrassing him. He's not hearing it for the first time. It has become what you call a fad, F-A-D, some kind of a fashion. And let me demonstrate the point. When Marxism ebbed down, following the Prague failures in the 70s and finally 1989, fall of Berlin Wall, academics who were Marxists moved en masse to what they call postmodernism. You'd remember that you are academics. It became a fashion, the word in town. Deconstruct, what. You didn't read an article that does not have deconstruction, that does not quote Foucault, Nietzsche, and all that. Postmodernism has gone down. We are now in the era of decolonization. So one asks yourself, is it a commitment or is it an era in the life of academics? What is the next one after decolonization? So my point, colleagues, is that I think we need to be self-reflective and not go into academic, not only go into academic endeavors and discourses for the sake of, because I know that when I write about decolonization, I'm secured of publication. If I write about something else, the article may not be accepted. It must be real. We must write about it as well as integrating it into our study material. The last point, Dr. Bopape, in a minute, is not only into the material, but into our practice. How we treat one another, how we speak with one another. I'm glad it's one of the few times that I come into a seminar and somebody didn't ridicule the other one. Because it's a culture here at UNISA. We know about it, we don't talk about it. Sometimes we even clap at it. Academics at UNISA, they've gone into the mode of either clapping for the insults because it's safe to do so, or just keeping quiet. Where is the university where I can differ vehemently with Dr. Bopape without fearing reprisal, or without me insulting him or him insulting back? But at UNISA, it has become a culture, and we have accepted it. Why is the decolonization that we talk about? Because decolonization should be, for some of us, about rehumanization. Where Nabato, and you are the expert on that, Dr. Bob. Thanks for indulging me.
In conclusion, I thought we were going to talk about, maybe to answer Professor Nkosi, what I think we are looking for from our side is maybe to request the powers that be to give us the same power as the assurance services, legal services, internal audit. If they can give us those powers, then we'll be able to do so. And we are indeed asking that we look at governance of transformation in the university so that we have those powers in the same way that internal audit, so that we have that ability to hold someone accountable. As we speak, we don't have those. But those assurance services, they do. And we are of the view, we are an assurance service and we should get those powers. Colleagues, can I request, and I think with your permission, that we end here, and then I'm told there is something outside. But before I do so, let me call upon my colleague. Oh, do you want to ask a question? Yes, I was about to say. No, I haven't forgotten about that. For her to come in. and to the owner. By the way, she's the one who conceptualized this particular seminar. So we're giving her the chance to close this particular seminar. I think you are allowed to come, you are requested to come or. No, I haven't forgotten about it. No, I haven't forgotten about it.
It's only 4 pages. No, on a serious note, I've written this because I don't want to forget who I must say thank you. My job is to say thank you, give the vote of thanks. So, dear distinguished guests, our discussant, our guest speaker, the program director, guests, colleagues, all protocols reserved, as we heard. On behalf of the Department of Leadership and Transformation, I would like to extend my heartfelt appreciation to Memuki, our guest speaker, to Mr. Tliani, our discussant, and to Dr. Bopapi, our program director, for their invaluable contributions to making this seminar, this human rights seminar, being held at UNISA, so close, so in the Human Rights Month. A big thank you, Dr. Bopapi, as our Executive Director of Department Leadership and Transformation, for your leadership and support to this event. Thank you. Please. Thank you. Okay. Your insights, your knowledge, experiences, I'm speaking, my back is to you, so forgive me, I feel conscious of that. Your insights, your knowledge, your experiences have enriched our understanding of the complexities of human rights. It's not easy, and the challenges facing our society. Your thought-provoking presentation, Memuki, and the discussion that followed has left us inspired. It left me inspired and motivated to work harder towards a more equitable, just, and inclusive world. I just want to add how grateful, how privileged I am to be working in the DLT, to be part of this change. I would like to thank all who took the time to attend the seminar. That's online. We are being followed online as well, or here in person in the room. To attend this seminar and engage in the fruitful discussion. And I'm sure there are many more questions. That's what Dr. Bopapi says. Afterwards, we can carry on with that. Your participation and contribution have made this seminar a success. Also, a big thank you to our wonderful, wonderful team, all dressed in red, the color of love. For your hard work, your contribution that has made this human rights seminar happen, and keeping us on track. Hey, do this, coercing, and Karen, where's this? Yes, please. So as we conclude the seminar, I urge all of us to continue to work towards promoting and protecting human rights in our communities, in our homes, in our workplaces. Remembering that each one of us has a responsibility involved here. It's not just about talking. I have a responsibility leaving this room. It is through collective action, but actually then I made a lot of changes on my short speech, the movement, the collective action that we can create a society where every person, and I say this lightly, can enjoy their human rights. Under that umbrella, where we come from, each one experiencing the history of our country in a different way. And I stand here and I say that I experienced our history very differently. Possibly, not everybody has the same, but I say that. So on individual levels, that's you and I. Now here we come to the important part. is how we treat each other and how we interact. That it is done with dignity and respect. And I like those words, dignity and respect. So once again, thank you to our guest speaker. Your passion, your activism inspires. Thank you. Thank you to the College of Law. Okay, and the program director, and each one of you who attended, the discussant. Thank you, Mr. Kliani. I hope that we will all take the knowledge and insights we have gained here today and take them forward, phambili, to make a positive impact in our communities, in our homes, in our workplace. Let that be the first line of my song. Possible for crucial dialogues, that until we find our song. We must talk until we find the song, and we write. Then we write the words of the song, and we say, this is our song, my song, your song. Thank you very much.
You forgot the technicians.
And thank you very much. Thank you. I'd like to thank the technicians for your expertise, and also that you are bringing this message to a wider audience. Thank you very much for that. You were here early. I was here early too, but I saw you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, colleagues. Would you like to? Okay. I thought we were going to say, colleagues, thank you very much for coming. Is it lunch? Or?
It's just break free.
All right. So we can have something to eat and drink and enjoy the rest of your day, colleagues. Thank you very much.
Thank you.